ever wondered about the relationship of fractions and percents and decimals? We're going to consider the following fractions: 1/2, 9/10, and 4/5. And I have some 100 grids. Let's take our first fraction, 1/2. And I'm actually going to take this one, this 100 grid, and fold it in half. So we have 1/2 of our 100 grid. And I'll shade it in so it's easy to see. If you've ever noticed a hundreds grid, you know that they come in strips of 10. And I'm going to use that to help me to look at 9/10. So if I fold the strip away, I know that all of this will be 9/10. And once again, I'll shade that in, 9/10. And 4/5. Once again, I can use the structure of the hundreds grid to help me. If I know that these are 10, then I know if I choose 2 of them, then that will give me 5 of them. So I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me fold that so it's easier to see. Each one of my sections will have 20. So if I take 4/5, I'll leave this one blank and color the rest in. The nice part about using a hundreds grid is that I now automatically have it worked out into percents, because percents really mean out of 100. And so when I take 1/2 of my hundreds grid, I know that it's going to be the same as 50 100ths, or 50%. 9/10, once again the same. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90%. 9/10 is the same as 90%. 4/5, if you'll remember, each one of my fifths was worth 20. So 20, 40, 60, 80%. 4/5 is 80%. We could even use percents that are a little bit trickier to figure out. For example, if we wanted to do 43%, we could shade in 10, 20, 30, 40, 43%. And you can see that's not quite half. Shade it in. Decimals are quite similar. Decimals give us, on the left-hand side, represented by 0 if it's less than 1, a 0, and our decimal. And in this case, we know that if we have 50 hundredths, we can represent that as either 50, or in this case, we're going to count each one of these as a 10th for our first place. We know we could always write that 0 and zeros on and on. But for today, we're just going to keep it to the simple 0 and 5/10, or 0.5. 9/10 is the same. We've already talked about tenths, and so we can write it as a 0 with our decimal and 9/10. Of course, our 4/5 will be represented as 0 and 4? No. We've talked about this, that we have 20s, groups of 20s, which really are made up of 2 groups of 10. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. We have 8/10 and 8/10. Let's look at another decimal number. And in order to do this, we're going to look and use a larger hundredths grid. Let's take our number as 0 wholes and 125 thousandths, or 0.125. If we use our grid, we know that we can take this whole first column of squares as our tenths. And there is our tenths. So we can color all of that in. Then we move to our 200ths. We know that the entire grid is made up of hundredths, so we just need to count 2 more of those as hundredths. Now we come to our thousandths. If I were to take this last hundredth here, the next hundredth, and divide it into 10, I would get thousandths. I'm going to try and make those as even as I can. It's kind of tricky. Let me double check that I've got enough. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to ask you to use your imagination and imagine that each one of those thousandths is equal. And we're going to need 5 of those. So I've got thousandths here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I will shade that in. And I know that that will be a half of that square. So we see that we have 125 thousandths. If we imagined all of those little squares all divided up in the same way that we did here, we would have 125 of them. Now that we've talked about the relationship of fractions, percents, and decimals, I wonder if you could use what we've done here and relate that to us as a fraction and as a percent.